I'm Josh Schneiderweiler. Coming up on Football Today.
The German Football Federation put out a report, and there was almost 3,000 verbal and physical attacks on referees in Germany last season, and 685 games had to be cancelled because of it.
Now, referees and fans have taken to the streets to make their voices heard.
It's just not acceptable anymore for the referees to be victims of violence on the football pitch. We are seen less and less as a person of respect, and that led us to demonstrating here today.
I still say to this day, if it happened on a night out or in a public place, they would have all been arrested, but because it's on a football pitch, it seems a blind eye is turned to it.
In the last 5 weeks alone, there have been referee strikes in Cologne, Berlin, and Uruguay, the latter of which caused the postponement of First Division matches this past weekend. There have been cases of alleged assault in the last couple of weeks from Nigeria to here in England. Today we hear from a referee who has allegedly been physically assaulted and look at why England has one of the worst records of referee abuse in all of Europe.
I was a player before, since I played football when I was at school, and then I got injured and I still wanted to be involved in the game, so I started refereeing.
We spoke to a referee who has been kept anonymous and his voice doctored to protect his anonymity.
I was too young to do coaching, so I thought I'd try refereeing.
What level do you referee? Is it Sunday League, five-a-side? What are we talking about?
Sunday League. I'm a level 5 senior county referee, and I do mainly Saturday, Sunday League.
Typically during a game, what are your interactions like with, the players, the coaches, and the fans? Do you typically receive any sort of abuse?
I wouldn't say typically abuse. It's more of them questioning stuff, which is always going to happen. But the one time recently went too far.
And so you say normally that you receive questioning from the fans and the coaches. What does that questioning feel like or sound like? Is it yelling at you, or what? Can you describe it a little bit more?
Yeah, most times if I give a decision, the odd player shouts. Most people actually come up to me and ask for the reason why, which if they talk to me nicely or talk to me with respect, then I'll by all means have a chat with them back and explain my decision either at half time or the end of the game, rather than starting the play all the time.
And so what would you consider normal back talking, and what would you consider kind of abuse?
Shouting, swearing directly in my face, insults, and then general things like that.
And so how common is that?
To be honest, it's not very common. It's maybe like 1 in 5 games probably you get the odd player like that.
And does that feel like a lot to you, or, do you talk to other refs about this? How common is that amongst your peers?
I'd say some people who I know have it a lot more, but some people have it a lot less. So all depends on the leagues people are officiating.
When you do get people shouting in your face and cursing, how does that make you feel?
Well, the thing that always comes to mind is, why do I bother? What's the point of me doing this if this is all I'm going to get?
And then what do you kind of tell yourself when you think that?
But it only lasts for 90 minutes. Or to another time of the game, there's not long enough to go, and it can't go on all day.
The people are shouting abuse. Is it only players, or is it, also coaches and fans?
It all depends on the game. Like, you will get, if the players are wound, if the players are getting upbeat, then so does the manager. But as referee in the middle, I tend to only hear it from the players because that's who's around me. I kind of switch off if the manager's shouting. That's to the assistants to deal with.
And what about the fans?
Again, I just you hear the odd comments here and there, but most time I'm not paying that much attention to them, so you can't actually hear the stuff they're saying.
And so when you hear people shouting at you and cursing at you, do you ever feel scared that, something might happen?
Before, I wouldn't say so, because most people, it's only heat the moment frustration, and I know you give it a few minutes or a few seconds, as soon as they walk away and they calm back down again, and at the end of the game, everyone will shake hands, put it behind us as a heat the moment thing.
And so, I would like you to describe maybe the worst incident that you've experienced on the field in a game?
The ball was going out of pitch. It went past the line. I'd given a throw in. The player didn't agree with me. The whole ball crossed the line to the stage that he was threatening me, threatened to actually violently hit me. So I sent him off. He then came running up to my face, shouted and screamed a bit more. He then turned his back and walked away. I then abandoned the match. This is a local five-side tournament. I went and spoken to the referee coordinator, the reasons why the game was abandoned. At that point, I could hear the player coming over to me again, still shouting, still swearing. He spoke to the coordinator for about 5 minutes. After that, he appeared calmed down. I turned my back to walk. I was always about 5 meters away from him. I was never that close. All I remember afterwards was turning my back and then coming around again, black vision and ears ringing. So the connection was made from his fist to my jawline or my left cheekbone. It swelled up almost straight away, and my jaw was painful to move or talk with. So at that point, I stopped there for that night and went to hospital.
What happened at the hospital? What attention did you get there?
I went to the nearest A&E unit, and they did X-rays, confirmed there was no breaks, but there was soft tissue damage.
After the attack, what was going through your mind? How did you process the incident?
At the time, I was more in shock that I couldn't believe what just happened. So I was more trying to get my head around what could I have done better, what could I have done differently, why has this happened, kind of thing.
Just to backtrack a little bit, after you were struck, did any of the players from person who struck you's team come over? And
by the time I spoke to referee coordinator in the middle, all the players had left or just going to get changed off the pitch. So they'd all left the pitch and gone when this was all happening in the middle. So when the player who assaulted me got taken off site and I was put in the car park, his players came back on the pitch and they're in complete shock that the referee coordinator told them what just happened. Because even his players went, and they didn't believe it. He had that in him. He didn't believe he'd actually do anything. But his team was supportive to me, saying, look, he won't be playing ever again for us. They gave me his name for the police statement, and his team were actually being a fair play about it.
And so you go to the A&E, and you mentioned they gave you his name for the police. At what point did you think I need to take this to the police?
Straight away. It seems like about 10 minutes after the incident, I was sat in the office at the venue talking to him. And as soon as I calmed myself down to what on earth just happened and actually processed it all, I thought, that's actually assault. I'm not going to, especially in my job in Surge, I can't turn up with injuries and things going on. So I thought, so I phoned the 101, the out of hours emergency or the non-emergency call line, and spoke to them. And I booked an appointment for the next day to go into the local police station for an actual interview.
Psychologically now, how have you come to terms with what happened?
I still haven't yet refereed, still haven't touched the cards, whistle, all that's still where it was since the incident happened. And it's one of the things that I do want to carry on, just got to try and find the right time and place to start again, really.
Do you feel scared to get back on the field because something like that might happen again?
In a way, yeah, I do. Thinking that that's how easy a player turned. This could happen at any moment again. This could happen to anybody else. So in a way, I can never forget what's happened. I always have in the back of my mind this moment. You know what I mean?
It's kind of left a scar.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, Christ, is this really worth it? And I could take being shouted at. That's fine. You shout me all you want to. But when it comes to physically, that's where I've got to work out I have worked out that my safety is far more important.
So what is, the drive or the motivation for you to continue doing this work?
I think it's all for the game. my whole life is involved around football. Ever since growing up, I've always watched football. I've always played football. I tried coaching. And since the last 9 years, I'm refereeing it. So I've always loved the game. So it's always been for that reason, really, because I want to still be involved in football. But when this is the outcome of trying to be involved, it definitely does make you think.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So in England, it's all over the country.
Tom Webb is a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth and coordinator of the Referee and Match Official Research Network.
There's not one particular area that's worse than others. It is something that happens regularly every weekend.
In the last couple of years, it was seen that grassroots refereeing is in a state of crisis.
Over the years of me being a referee in the last 4.5 years, I've been headbutted, I've been punched, I've been spat at.
We've had referees going on strikes. We've had stories of physical assaults making the headlines.
In terms of verbal abuse, when we did the survey, we had over 90% of referees said they'd been verbally abused of a sample of over 2,000. So, you know, it was a huge number. Physical abuse is obviously not so high. It was almost 19%. But even then, a fifth of respondents is pretty high. So there's no one area that's worse than another in England. It is just a major sort of issue. It's not only England that has these problems. For example, there have been strikes in Germany, local level, where referees in Berlin, for example, started striking because of the violence that they were suffering.
Following several high-profile attacks against match officials and a report by the German Football Association on the recent rise in lower league violence, referees took action.
We decided to strike for a weekend in order to give everyone a wake-up call and make the public aware of the issues at hand.
There have also been issues in Peru where a referee was attacked recently in a major cup competition. In the Netherlands, we know that a referee sadly lost their life a few years ago.
Mr. Nieuwenhuizen was attacked after he officiated at a match on Sunday. The game was between the club his son plays for, Bouten Boys in the town of Almere, and the Amsterdam club, New Sloten.
So it's not just England that has these problems, and there are issues throughout football in Europe and also outside Europe as well.
But as I understand it, this happens more in England than elsewhere.
What we found, though, when we did the work in France and the Netherlands with the football associations in both of those countries and also UEFA, what we found was that the frequency of the abuse wasn't as frequent as it was in England, so it didn't happen as often. In England, that happens more regularly. It is a big problem in England. Now, whether there are cultural issues at play there, in the research we looked a little bit at that, and certainly we know that there are cultural issues or differences across the countries in Europe, so that could be a factor as well. But certainly England is one of the worst in terms of the abuse that we've studied across countries.
Can you give an example of a cultural difference between England and other places in Europe that also impacts refereeing?
There's Sunday league football in England, pub football, that many countries in Europe don't have. They don't have that sort of culture where, you know, an early Sunday kickoff where people might be hungover that are playing, for example. That doesn't tend to happen in many other countries in Europe. So culture does have an impact, and certainly we can still learn from what's happening in some of these other countries. So, you know, but what we don't want in England is something that tragic to happen that happened in the Netherlands for us to be forced to act. What we want to do is be proactive and do these actions before something like that happens. And the FA have tried to do that. The Respect Programme is an attempt to do that. And the Respect Programme has also made gains. You know, it's not a completely negative view of the Respect Programme that referees have, and I think that's important to identify as well.
What about body cams? Is that a potential solution? I've seen people mention that.
Yeah, I know that there's a swell of opinion around body cams, and probably a growing number of people calling for it. The problem with it is that the IFAB, who make the laws of the game, and FIFA have said that cameras can't be allowed at the moment. So it's written into the laws of the game. So until they change that stance, that's going to be difficult to introduce, you know, coherently in a widespread fashion across countries or across confederations like UEFA. I know that there are also issues around how that footage is used. How would that work in terms of criminal proceedings, for example, if the police became involved? So there are certain things that need to be worked out and thought about before that can come into any sort of trials and things like that.
You know, you just mentioned the police being involved. What are some of the punishments that people that physically or verbally abuse referees can expect, or is it too lenient?
Yeah, I think many people would say it is too lenient. I know in some countries, in France, for example, they have a law that treats referees as in any other civil servant, such as police officers, for example. So if you assault a referee in the course of their duty, you're treated in the same way as if you've assaulted a police officer. So you can go to prison. You know, that's what can happen. Now, that doesn't happen often in this country. I think there have been incidents where people have been charged by the police, but I don't think there's enough of a deterrent, you know, and that's outside the FA jurisdiction. That's something that the police can look at, that perhaps the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the government can look to influence. And I think, you know, the research is there that can underpin that. The findings are there. We know the issues. We know so also some of the policy implications and solutions that could be looked at as well. But why shouldn't they be charged? You know, it's an assault.
In your research, you pointed out that 19% said that they had been physically assaulted or physically abused.
Yeah.
In any other workplace, that would be a pretty crazy figure. Why is it not in refereeing?
I think it is. And I think, you know, the FA are, you know, not happy with those sort of figures. And you know, they're looking to reduce that. They've brought in sin bins, for example.
In 2017, the International Football Association Board, IFAB, put new provisions in the laws of the game to allow football associations to try something new. They borrowed something from rugby, and it's sin bins.
They're trialling things. So they are trying to do it, but it is difficult. The structure of football in this country, in England, is quite unique, you know, with county FAs and the way that football's governed. So it's hard for the FA to govern the whole country. That's why the county FAs are there, to help regionally. Now, the other problem we found is that referees, because of the issues they've had with the disciplinary procedures within county FAs at regional level, they're not reporting some of these incidents. Now, that's a major problem, because if the FA don't know the full extent of the problem, how can they act? You know, it's not going to change overnight. The cultural change takes time, but it also takes the will of the people that are in charge. It takes strong governance, and it takes investment as well. Those things need to happen.
What areas can or should we focus more on in the future?
We need to focus on the working environment and the operational environment that these referees operate within. And when we're talking about youth football, quite often that's very young referees that are officiating that. They could be 14, 15 years of age. If they're subjected to any form of verbal or physical abuse at that age, there's major issues there in terms of not only them being retained in football, you know, they may well walk away, but also their well-being, their mental health, things like that. We don't know enough about that. We've just started doing some research on that subject area. We've got a book chapter which is being published next year on that. And we've also got a study which is underway with female referees looking at their health and well-being, mental health and well-being. If there's abuse, there's going to be issues related to well-being and mental health. And we don't know enough about that, and there's not enough support for referees on that subject at the moment.
So should we be optimistic or pessimistic going forward on this subject?
I would say both. So it's pessimistic that it's still happening, and we're seeing incidents of physical and verbal abuse that are being reported regularly. So that's we need to be pessimistic about that. It's still happening. We should be more positive in that the research is happening. The evidence is being built. There's a number of studies that we've published. There's some people that have just started working in this subject area that are starting to look at this subject as well from slightly different angles as well. So we should be positive that research is happening that can underpin some of and inform some of these issues that are ongoing. So I think we can be positive, but we also need to understand that there are issues, and they've manifested themselves over a long period of time, and it takes time to change culture. It takes time to change people's attitudes and behaviour.
Tom Webb is a senior lecturer at the University of Portsmouth and is the author of the Elite Soccer Referees book. The show was produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and this was Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend. See you next time.